Hi, listeners. We want to tell you about a podcast we're really digging. It's called Christopher Kimball's Milk Street Radio. Every week, they travel the world to find the most fascinating stories about food, including children who harvest cod tongues after school in Norway and a detective who tracks down food thieves. And on Milk Street Radio, you can always find the unexpected. The comedian who ranks apples using an elaborate 100-point system, the secret history of grocery stores, and how to eat your way through Italy. They also interview the most beloved names in food like Jacques Pepin, Sola Aweli, Jose Andres, Jet Tila, Ina Garten, Nigella Lawson, and Padma Lakshmi. Plus, co-hosts Christopher Kimball and Sarah Moulton do live calls with listeners and answer their questions about ingredients, techniques, and culinary mysteries. Like, why roasting a leg of lamb made one caller's oven explode? Ever wonder why your bread won't rise or your souffle falls flat? Chris and Sarah have the answers. You'll also hear from a rotating cast of contributors, including Kenji Lopez-Alt, Cheryl Day, Dan Pashman from The Sporkful, and Alex Ainuz, a French guy cooking from YouTube. Take a listen at 177milkstreet.com/radio or just search your podcast app for Milk Street Radio. You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
Whether you're a chef or just love going to restaurants, you know the best ingredients are everything. Westholme is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Learn more at westholme.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cutting the Curd on Heritage Radio Network. I'm your host, Joe Salonia. Today, we are excited to have on the show renowned cheesemonger and author Gordon Edgar. Gordon has written acclaimed books such as Cheesemonger Life on the Wedge and Cheddar, A Journey to the Heart of America's Most Iconic Cheese. With over 30 years as a cheesemonger, at the same cheese counter, I may point out, and a member of the Guild de Fromage, he brings a wealth of knowledge and passion to our community, and we are thrilled to have him joining us today to discuss the topic of food that is positioned or labeled as vegan cheese alternatives or vegan cheese. Gordon, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be back.
So what sparks this having you on the show, right, was this piece you recently wrote with the Cheese Professor on May 7th, 2024, of that release that day, that was titled, quote, I was an informant for the Good Food Awards Cheese 2024. So the Good Food Awards for the cheese category, right? And the mention of vegan cheese, Kerfuffle, is written as part of your text. And it was a product that was made of nut milk and blue molds, vegan cheese. It won a Good Food Award, and it is called Climax Blue. Then the award was reversed or revoked. And can you just tell us a little bit more about what led to this, or more about the article? Can you set the tone for us? What's this all about?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think where I came into this was, we're an independent natural food store in San Francisco. So, we carry vegan options for people. And we always have. I always have for the last 30 years. It's a bigger part of the market now than it used to be. And the ones that we carried 30 years ago were god awful and gross. And thankfully those aren't on the market anymore. But I was already familiar with this product before this whole controversy happened. Specifically, the reason the article was titled the way it was about being a cheese informant was that the Washington Post wrote an article about this whole thing, and didn't talk to me. I was not hiding my identity, but said something about a cheese informant told the Good Food Awards that there was problems with this award. So I think it's kind of funny. I think it's kind of funny to be a cheese informant. But basically, I was familiar with this product before because they brought it in for us to carry, and I tasted it. And in the realm of vegan alternatives, it was one of the better ones I tasted. Quite frankly. And we were ready to bring it in. I was like, "Oh yeah, we'll buy some of this." And then because I'm a professional buyer, I then asked for an ingredient list because they didn't have one when they brought in the product for tasting. And when I saw the ingredient list, there was an ingredient. You never get this with real cheese, right? With real cheese, you got your milk, you got your salt, you got your rennet, you got your cultures. Boom. Maybe you got some mold in there. But and some other ones have some different things, but basically it's a very small list of ingredients. So when I saw something called kokum butter, Kokum, I was like, I don't know, what is this? So I looked it up, and then I saw that it wasn't on the GRAS list, and the GRAS list, GRAS stands for generally regarded as safe, and that's kind of just the basic bottom line for an ingredient that we would sell at our store. I mean, if it's not on, if an ingredient is not on that list, we're not going to carry it. So I said, and I did a little research on it, and I see it's mostly used for cosmetic use. There is one company that is got a FDA exemption to use it for. Exemption might not be the right word, but got approval to use it for a food and for it to be safe for one confection. But in terms of this kind of use, it just hadn't been used before. So I went back to Climax and said, "Hey, this is not an ingredient we could sell." Fast forward, Good Food Awards. I was not a judge at the Good Food Awards. I am not affiliated with Good Food Awards, so I can't speak to their internal process. But when I heard all this stuff being portrayed as this amazing moment that this vegan cheese had won an award in a cheese contest, and then I saw it was this cheese, so I kind of I kind of approached Good Food Awards, and I was like, "Hey, did you get an ingredient list with this?" And right. Again, I can't speak to all of that, but soon after that, it seemed that the award was taken away or not given out. So that's the basics of the story.
That's the basics of the story. All right. Well, let's break this down and back up a little bit too, because I think that's a great overview, right? That's the short version. And so we want to understand your stance. You do sell vegan products in your department, and you have for years. So how do you label them, or how do you feel about calling them cheese? What do you call them? Do you air quote them, or quote them? With your writing, your signage.
It's funny. I actually do air quote all the signs.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think that I guess it's not an air quote. It's an actual quote.
Well, we're on the audio waves only, but you do right. What we call air quotes with our right. hand language. But
I mean, I don't know. People want alternatives for various reasons. And I'm not necessarily there to get into all those reasons with those people. When I became the cheese buyer 30 years ago, we already had vegan products. It's not even like I brought them into the store. I mean, I'm not a perfect human being. Occasionally I'll just refer to them as vegan cheese, because it's shorthand and it's quicker. Vegan nut pate sometimes is more applicable. Vegan processed food is sometimes more applicable. But there's kind of two sets in my mind of the vegan cheese alternatives. Most of them want nothing more than to be craft singles, not made with milk. They don't have aspirations beyond that. They're meant for, easy consumer use. They're not meant to have a lot of flavor, but then again, craft processed singles don't have a lot of flavor. So, it's not that far away. Most customers who buy it more complain about an aftertaste rather than a forward taste with those kind of things, in terms of not tasting like a craft single. But Climax is in the other category, and that's the category of trying to actually compete with cheese. And there's a few brands, and I think that, the stuff is getting better and better. Some of it actually has integrity as food now. in terms of like, it's got smaller ingredient lists and has, and actually might even taste good on its own. If you're comparing it to cheese, I think you're always going to find it lacking. But if you're just like, oh, this is a bunch of nuts mixed together and, solidified and maybe fermented, then, that might actually taste okay. You can think about it more as a dip, but yeah, often I just, for the shorthand of the situation of the retail counter, might just call it a cheese. I don't think that's right, but I'm not a perfect human. I'm working on it.
Yeah, well, I think we all are. I know I am, and that's for sure. I felt like calling it a vegan cheese alternative. I wonder if that's fair. But I mean, maybe that's another point to be made. Like, what should we all agree to call something? Should we give it a name like V's?
Fromage. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that
fromage, right.
I think that the real crux of the issue here is that it's really annoying to cheesemakers who have to often meet CFRs, the federal regulations around cheese, and so they have to meet these sometimes stringent requirements, that in order to call something a cheddar or a mozzarella or whatever it is, but that with the vegan products, they get to do whatever they want and then just slap the word vegan in front of it. And then they can call it a vegan cheddar, and I think that really sticks in the craw of people who are making these products and have been selling these products, because it's a different level of requirement. And I feel like that doesn't feel fair to people.
Yeah. That's a big giant point right there.
Yeah. And I feel like, to me, the most obvious one is the vegan butter. Because the vegan butter, I mean, even worse than cheese, because there already is a word for vegan butter, and it's called margarine. Right. And
right.
but margarine has such a bad reputation that that vegan producers want to call it vegan butter now, because the word margarine has already been kind of ruined in the consumer's eyes. And I think that those things, it's like, a lot of the vegan brands are very critical of dairy, sometimes rightfully. There's some real issues there, but then they want to they want to sponge off the glory. We're not. This isn't our brand new margarine that's awesome. It's the best margarine you ever have. No, this is vegan butter. So
right. That's to me. That's not many steps removed for the Gruyere conversation, but meaning to the point of where the CFR comes into play for cheesemakers, for Le Gruyere AOP. Not every wheel produced is even allowed to be called Le Gruyere AOP unless it's approved to bear the label, going through the criteria and standards. Meanwhile, the other cheeses that parade around as Gruyere, they're just Gruyere because they feel like it on a Tuesday or whatever. That's not fair, because the cheesemakers who are making the original recipe can't even enjoy that luxury of calling every wheel they make that num. But I digress.
Well, somebody just offered me some vegan Gruyere the other day, so.
Oh man, that's gonna make everybody's hair hurt right now. That's not making me happy. Don't tell me that. But we need to hear it. We need to hear. Next thing you know, there'll be 3D printed cheese or something called
yeah, it's just a matter of time.
This is a force that's happening, and it is kind of unnerving. Even the word milk, right? This word, between milk and butter. I mean, we're talking about names of things. I mean, hey, why can't there be tofu, right? That's soybean cheese, arguably, right? I was out with some cheese friends the other day. Mm-hmm. Was Christine Januzzi, Josh Windsor, John Braga. Hello, shout out to them, because there was some good talk about this topic. And these things were brought up, is that there's there's medlar cheese, which is fruit paste. There's apple butter. I mean, it's not butter. It's smeared. There's a recipe for it. There's tofu, which is soybean cheese. There's head cheese, right? That's nothing to do with cheese. It's just called that. But we don't seem to make too much of a big deal about head cheese or medlar cheese. Or we don't make, they're not really taking up arms about apple butter so much. But somehow these they bother me a little bit. Someone who represents well-made cheese. I don't want just to be evolving into where folks don't even know butter and cheese and milk is anymore, and before you know it, it's just all one big confusing mess.
I think that the difference with all those other names is, they're not trying to be an alternative and take those places in the market. I mean, nobody's selling head cheese as an alternative to cheddar.
There you go. Right.
Nobody's selling apple butter as an alternative to butter. And yet these the vegan ones are in direct competition. I mean, I feel like I don't feel as strongly as I used to about the names, only because I'm very weary of the debate. But I think that what's really interesting about the Good Food Awards thing is that they have their own internal. It's a Good Food Awards. It's supposed to recognize food that is good.
Yeah,
in many ways.
They're the unfancy food show too, aren't they?
Yeah, well, and as far as I know, I mean, they're supposed to recognize brands that are like more traditional, more well-made. And if you look at the requirements for cheese, there's a lot of requirements there, more requirements than pretty much any other competition. And yet, for the vegan products, they simply say, or vegan alternatives, So that's also, an interesting way that we treat these products. We kind of aren't taking them very seriously on some level. It's like we don't expect them to be that good. So it's like, okay, here's a little helping hand. You can just, enter the competition anyway. We don't care about the provenance of your nuts. We don't care about the the ingredients.
Yeah.
It's like, just go ahead and you can enter because you're a vegan alternative, even though the cheese has to be, and this isn't a direct quote, but the cheese has to be like farmstead or grass raised or like whatever.
Yeah, you don't have attention put towards the where the nuts for the product, or maybe I haven't really shopped and dug down that deep, but like I don't hear about where the nuts are coming from and how taking a closer look at how those are grown, the amount of water it takes. I mean, they're not exactly the solution to climate crisis is to switch from, because sometimes the motivation is that cheese is a bad contributor to climate change and.
And I think that there's real issues there, but I also think that what we see with especially as there's a lot of big money that's been involved in these alternative foods. I mean, Climax considers itself a tech company, not a food company, and what we're seeing, and this is where this audience, especially a cheese audience, is really would be concerned is we're seeing a remystification of food, right? The whole cheese world, the whole like food world from the 70s on, certainly was about like, broadly speaking, was like, oh, let's get back to basics, less processed food, know your farmer, know how stuff is made, know more about what you're eating. And yet you look at a lot of the vegan stuff, especially the tech, like really high tech produced ones, and it's all about mystification. It's all about trade secrets. Nobody ever talks about sourcing. Nobody ever talks about that kind of stuff. Maybe it's organic, but like that's about it. And, it's a very different kind of way to treat the food system. And I think that that's where, it's one of the underlying things that I haven't heard a lot of cheese people talk about, but honestly is one of the issues that I think that we're all feeling but not putting words to, is that, it's instead of being like, oh, this is the producer who makes this, and since I'm talking to Joe Salonia, I'll say, who makes this Gruyere this way and does this kind of method, it's all very much like, oh, we have figured out the best way and here it is. And you can't know any more about it. Right. So, I mean, it's a different thing for a monger, that's a little difficult.
But it just seems that like they're in this sector, the fact that they're not inclined is diametrically opposed to how we view and work in cheese, though, then you can say. Or would you not say that?
Well, no, definitely. I think the history of cheese, when it's had big improvements has been a history of cooperation and sharing best practices. And that's not a part of tech culture. It's not a part of venture capital culture. It's not a part of angel investor culture. So I think that's where that comes from. There's a culture of secrecy, and I'm not talking specifically in this one. I want to make clear, I'm not talking specifically about Climax. That's just my feeling about the way some of these things are going in particular. I also think that there's a funny thing because I think that there's when people see money to be made and when people see a lot of money being thrown around, nobody's getting a ton of money thrown at them to like start a farmstead cheese operation. But there is a lot of money thrown around for vegan alternatives right now. And, I'll give you an example. I won't be specific here, but I once met with a couple of guys who I met with them in their hometown because I happened to be there. And they wanted to produce a vegan cheese, and they wanted to the raw product for the cheese. It was a different protein. The raw product for the cheese was from one country. Then they wanted to manufacture it in a different country, and then bring it to the United States. And the funny thing, you've got all that. We import cheese, so our hands aren't totally clean, but people don't expect that. But then the funniest thing about this is that these guys came to this meeting all dressed in camo because they were going to go deer hunting after the meeting, and it's just funny because people still picture the vegan cheese industry as actually vegans, actually committed ideologically when. Really, and again, I'm not talking about Climax here. This is a different company I'm talking about. But when actually it's like, hey, there's money to be made there. Let's go this direction. And that also affects the industry. I'm not saying people aren't trying to make money in the dairy industry. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that there seems to be there's a lot more money flowing in the non.
The money's the first part. The philosophy. Product might not be the first part. It's profit first, maybe.
And some people are really committed. And I do want to say because I don't want to come off, totally on that direction. Because I think that the important thing to remember is cheese is 10,000 years old, right? Mm-hmm. And these kind of vegan alternatives to cheese, and I'm not talking about like traditional tofu or stuff like that, but these kind of alternatives to cheese, they're maybe 30 years old. So there is a great potential. If we ate cheese 30 years after it was first made, I think we wouldn't be talking about a lot of nuance, So I think that, there is potential for that. There's potential for the fermentation of things that are not dairy. And there's a potential to develop flavor from the fermentation of other proteins that could be really interesting. We're just very, very early on in that. And so it's like in this case where they tried to claim that this was like, the judgment of Paris. It really wasn't. and that's okay. It's, the vegan cheese alternatives are not going to compete with real cheese in terms of flavor right now. And why would we expect them to?
Mm-hmm. On that thought, let's just put a pin in that real quick. And we're just going to need to take a short break right after a message from our sponsor, Gordon. Hang out one sec.
Whether you're a chef or just love going to restaurants, the best ingredients are everything, especially when it comes to beef. In Northern Australia, there's a different approach to raising high-quality beef. Westholme, based in Queensland and Northern Territory, is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. They look after a sweeping stretch of territory from Brisbane to Darwin, with a climate as varied as the landscape. Westholme raises Wagyu beef, but there's a saying that their real job is to grow grass, meaning that if they take care of the land, the rest will take care of itself. Westholme stewards 16 million acres of rangeland guided by their natural ecosystems. Westholme's team of rangeland experts and nature managers use a variety of tools to monitor and respond to the welfare of the environment. like satellites that assess grass health, and on-the-ground research. Cattle are happier when they have the freedom to forage and explore. So Westholme ensures that they can roam wild, foraging at will for the first 2 to 3 years of their lives. Their cows graze on native grasses like Mitchell grass, which is only found in Australia, along with dozens of other plants, herbs, and seasonal legumes. The result is signature Australian Wagyu, built on a genetic lineage tracing back to Japan and imbued with the terroir of Northern Australia and a flavor suited to complement any cuisine. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westholme.com.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We're here chatting with all-star cheese pro and author Gordon Edgar of Rainbow Food Co-op in San Francisco. Okay, Gordon, let's get back to it. You were mentioning before break that this there was some comparison to like the Judgment of Paris 1976 when California wines were gaining recognition, beating out the best of France. That's not as so much of drawing the line like the way Rogue River Blue beat out best cheeses in the world in 2019. You're not suggesting this is not a watershed moment like that was, or you don't want to make that comparison, but it was mentioned somewhere in your article is that it's not that. Is you wanted to emphasize that point?
Well, just that, in that Washington Post article that I think a lot of people saw if they got through the paywall, that, were the one that called me a cheese informant. They made that comparison.
They made that comparison.
And so that's why it was out there. That's the only reason I brought it up. And, it's not. I mean,
No.
It doesn't. That comparison is not applicable in many ways. And, again, I wasn't a judge at that competition, but at any competition, you have, it tells you what style you're judging. So I feel pretty confident without having had this conversation with them that the judges were like, hey, this is a really good vegan product. Let's recognize that this tastes better than most other vegan cheeses we've ever tried. Because they clearly knew it was vegan. It's in the, first of all, you can taste it if you're a cheese judge. But secondly, I'm sure it was in the product description. Again, this is a little bit of a guess, but I have judged the Good Food Awards before, and I can't imagine that it didn't say that. When the judges were presented with the Climax Blue, which was anonymous, but the idea that it was like, oh, we tasted this and this was the best cheese here, and oh my God, it's vegan. That didn't happen.
Yeah,
but that is the way that it was tried to be portrayed.
I see.
Yeah.
It's just that what I worry for is that we're already still getting good work done in the cheese community for artisan cheese versus manufactured high volume cheese that just made robotically. Again, we'll call it the Velveeta world. Let's call it, right. There's still good work to be done. Like and then artisan cheese it's not just simply cheese, right? It's a community. It's a system. It's inspired by the pastoral life, tending animals on grass and pastures, cultivating hay, possibly during the warmer months. There's a handcraft process. And then there's like the literal alchemy that happens when you combine milk from a ruminant animal, who, by the way, eats 100% vegan diet, right? With friendly bacterial cultures ran it in time. It's literally alchemy. And that's just like this gorgeous, beautiful thing that so many of us are in love with. And then there's this channel kind of trying to bite into all that work and progress and research and effort and to uphold the words. And even the word artisan, Domino's uses it now. Like even that word's kind of, we don't just want to protect these words a little bit, or just to help them. Hey, you guys need some words. The pig farm industry came up with something. It's called pork. Like they don't say, hey, you want a pig meat chop tonight? It's like you want a pork chop, right? No one's ever asked me, and no one asked me, hey, do you want a cow patty with some bread and cheese on it? No, it's called a hamburger. It's called beef. The goat meat world is hopefully going to still evolve. That was or still is called Siobhan, right? And why is it so? Why aren't they thinking of a margarine word? For the 2020s, come up with a new word, or let's help them. Just stay away from our words. Excuse me, I seem a little guarded or wanted to protect.
No, I hear what you're saying. I mean, I feel like, that is, I mean, that's the world we live in,
Mm-hmm.
when somebody creates something with a word that has value, because of the meaning of the word, what artisan once had, what other terms we use once had, then other people are going to use it, especially if it's not a legal term. Um,
Yeah.
but even the legal terms, we know, because we know with Gruyere has a good name control. There's some name controls out there that aren't so good.
Yeah.
So we see even the trying to protect, a word or phrase can be very difficult on a legal process. Um, so, on some level, I mean, this is when I say I've grown weary. I used to fight about this kind of thing all the time, and I feel like, I feel like it's just too much sometimes to try to fight against,
Mm.
the changing meaning of words as used in marketing by companies that have a lot of money to push those things. I think it's tough, and so we just need to keep explaining what it is that's different. What is it that is different about, the cheese we love, and the cheese that's really special, and the cheese that is, unapproachable from the alternatives, in terms of taste, in terms of, tradition, in terms of, ingredients, and all those things. And I think that's I wish it was an easier answer, because that's a hard answer. That's an answer
Yeah.
that takes time. It's an answer that, because I still work over a cheese counter, there's some customers that would hang out for a half hour talking cheese, if
Mm-hmm.
that if nobody else is in the store. And there's some customer who are already walking away before I'm halfway through a sentence, in
Mm.
answering a question. So,
Yeah.
there's
Right.
both of those type of people. And I think the answer is to, let's educate when we can, share what we
Sure.
know when we can, and I mean, I do have a big issue with, like I said, the CFRs, the Code of Federal Regulation rules, and being able to
Mhm.
just slap vegan in front of something. Especially when now it's like it seems like the vegan or plant based is really what they use. Typeface gets smaller and smaller, and and just a word about plant based, and you said this, already, but it's like I have always, say any of us who know about cheese find the term plant based so funny for these things, because like how often do we talk about what the ruminants are eating, like all the time?
Right. Yeah.
All the time. And so the idea that, like, it's like, what is milk? Milk is, plants filtered through ruminant, and
Yeah.
it's like, so it's funny. I mean, that's that, it's like, oh, plant based, and I'm like, oh, you mean like milk? I mean, what else is it? But I guess that's an aside. But it's the word thing is always tough. I
Yeah.
remember, I think I wrote my first book about how artisan was already gone, and I wrote
Mm-hmm.
that I didn't come out till 2010, but I wrote that in 2008, so
Yeah.
it's the terms we use unfortunately have to constantly change, and that's the nature of the food business, these days.
Well, hopefully that leads to, like you said, time to have a conversation, time to educate not only yourself but the guests or the folks you're serving, and that makes the good work at the counter or a specialty store a specialty store. But we are like fighting all the forces of other uh, big companies with their marketing and in the more massive, we'll call them the Amazon maybe channels of the world, where there's just, where there might not be a cheesemonger, and you have someone who, maybe doesn't have all the information, and they don't know what they're buying, and they see the word cheese, or they see the word. I think most people, I don't know, my sense is that by now, where we are with the milk, right, all the alternative milks, I guess that when you buy almond milk, it's called almond milk, or is it not called almond milk anymore? Is it called almond nectar, or I don't know? But oat milk, for instance, that it's not from a cow, right? It's from it's not like we're being tricked. We know what we're buying when we buy it. Um,
Well,
But
I would say this as someone who works in a store that has a lot of these alternative products. I actually think that the alternative cheese stuff is actually better labeled than a lot of other stuff. I work in the damn store, and I bought something by accident the other day that was a vegan alternative. It was a pudding. I was treating myself to a pudding, and it was the
uh-huh.
most god awful thing that I've ever put
Oh
in my
man,
mouth because it was some kind of vegan like weird pudding. And and honestly, I even after I tried it, it took me a second to see that it wasn't what I thought it was. And I think that those
dang it, yeah.
that's it. It's a marketing issue, and it's a it's a consumer issue, and consumers need to be more aware of those things. But I'd also say that like I get a lot of customers now who are buying cheese for a party, and then they buy one of the fancier vegan alternatives also for their
I
vegan
see.
guests, and they're
Right to
and they're
keep.
not putting it out there as like this is this is better than the triple cream brie that I just put out there. They're putting it as like, oh, I have a couple of vegan friends. This is so they will eat it.
Yeah, it's include your your loved ones in the group. Yeah, it's no different than if I have a pizza party and I have a friend over that's gluten free. I'll buy a gluten free crust, and then we go ahead and make that pizza for them.
Absolutely.
Why should they not come over or feel comfortable, right? I think it's in that spirit. I think. But you're just so folks listening who haven't been to Rainbow Grocery, your entire store is meatless, right?
Yeah, we the in fact luckily in 1975 they decided there weren't a lot of protein alternatives, so they allowed an exemption for cheese with rennet to the rules of being a
Okay,
vegetarian store.
you snuck right
So
in with that one.
yeah, luckily, before many couple of years before I worked there, luckily they made that decision. Otherwise, we'd be like, "Oh, sorry, no Parmigiano Reggiano." Well, you probably wouldn't know my name. I
Yeah,
probably
I don't
wouldn't.
think we'd know Gordon. You'd be working somewhere else. I think. Who knows?
or I wouldn't have worked in cheese. Who knows? I mean, I just kind of
Uh-huh.
wanted to work at Rainbow when I got hired, so I just kind of ended up in cheese. But yeah, it would be a much less interesting cheese department for that reason. No, but the exceptions were pet food, gelatin capsules for vitamins, and
Uh-huh.
rennet and cheese.
That's very specific.
Otherwise, we're a vegetarian store.
Okay, and like just in case anybody missed it in the beginning, I could always rewind. But you've been there. Have you been there since 1994? Is that the year you started there?
Yeah, I started in 1994.
And what were some of the first, just off the top of your head, some of the best sellers from that year or in your beginning years? Were you a buyer at 1994?
Well, I became a buyer about 6 months into working there. Um,
Wow. Okay.
And
Yeah.
and honestly, it was a much smaller store. We moved to a bigger location, so the
Okay.
buying back then was much more just like kind of inventory buying.
Yeah.
There wasn't room for really anything new. It was just kind of keep what's in stock. I would say that the best sellers back then, well, Parmigiano Reggiano is always your number one, even back then, and probably back then it was just Monterey Jack, mild cheddar. I think our fancy cheddar was a Canadian cheddar. It wasn't even Black Diamond. It was some other brand.
Wow.
But we had very few cheeses back then. So I mean,
Hmm.
we had maybe 50. So it was pretty much the basics. Yeah, no, I remember bringing in Taleggio for the first time. I remember bringing in Fontina Valdosta for the first time and being like, hey, these are cheeses people might want. You know,
Right on.
who knows?
Well, and you were right. You were reading the conditions at sea, and you were absolutely correct. And you've also, I'm sure, helped build up so many California producers and other producers.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, back then it was kind of fun because, even though it was small and all that kind of stuff, people were just like dying to support small local producers. So
Mm.
there was a lot of cheese that would never make it to my counter now, that we sold because it was like, oh, so and so up here in Sonoma is making a new cheese. We brought it in, and boy, it sure tastes different every wheel. Every wheel is an
Uh,
adventure, but people really wanted to support that kind of stuff, and and the level of cheese expectation and knowledge back then was much lower with the consumers than it is now. So, people would just kind of go with it. Um, Whereas now there's a higher expectation and, quite honestly, a higher price for cheese. So there's not as much room for that margin of error, at least in our market.
And you have about how many cheeses in your set? And correct me if I'm wrong. Do you consider yourself a cut to order counter or a hybrid of that?
No, we do. We will cut to order for people, but generally we're cut and wrap department for the most part. And we have about 300 cheeses. Then we have also probably about 35 or 40 vegan alternatives. Since we're talking about that.
Yeah, no, I wanted to. That was my next question. So I'm trying to gauge like how much out of the whole set is. Because if you said you had 30 vegan cheese alternatives, and some folks listening, that might sell 60 or 70 cheeses, might think half your cheese, but it's about 1/10 or 10% vegan cheese alternatives. And then how many of those are in like a tub versus I'm going to cut it and wrap it vegan cheese alternative?
It's funny. We're actually only cutting and wrapping one vegan cheese right now. We have done a few, but that industry is not super into cut and wrap. For one thing, the ingredient lists are long, so it's easier for and the allergen lists are longer, so it's easier for me to have them cut and wrap or pre-cut because it takes a lot of work out of it. I do think that is where it's going. I do think that eventually where it's going to go there, and there are some that if we had a few more, we would launch into probably 5 or 6 of the higher end ones doing cut and wrap. We're not quite there, but I think we're going to be there very soon. But yeah, and I will say this, some of the, in our, say, top 100 sellers in the department, some of the vegan stuff is up there, partially because it has such a high price point. I mean, if I'm looking at sales, not just, number of units sold in terms of dollars, the vegan cheeses demand a very high price. You can bring in a vegan cheese at a much higher price than you bring in a regular cheese, and it'll sell. It'll sell at least the first time while people check it out. I can't say that about even the most amazing small production artisan, American cheese. If I bring it in at $45 a pound, I've really got to sell that to people, and I've really got to put it in people's mouths. Vegan customers are so desperate for good alternatives that it doesn't matter what the price is. We'll sell out of the first, batch that we get because everybody wants to try it. Again, as all retailers know, it's like the second purchase, do they come back for it? That's important. But it's really interesting dynamic that it's much easier to say, oh yeah, we'll give that a try with the vegan stuff than it is with regular cheeses. Partially because there's people already have all their favorite, like artisan cheeses and really high quality cheeses. Whereas the vegan cheeses, people are still looking for that one. That what's going to be mine? What's going to be the one that I buy every week? And they're still looking and hoping. And I don't know how many more years, decades, whatever it'll take to get there. But there's still a lot of searching going on in that market.
Yeah, so it sounds like the force of that channel is growing a little bit. So I guess I'm gonna. I don't know if it's the hill I'm going to die on, but it might be where I just want I want the industry to stop calling it cheese and milk. I wish for that, and to come up with other words like tofu, for instance, like come up with another word for the category that's not the word cheese. I think it'll even help the consumer understand exactly what they're buying when they buy it. With people's ever shortening attention span, someone may buy a cheese called something blue and think it's a blue cheese and not realize what it was until they get home. I could see that happening.
Absolutely. And there was stuff like, I refused to carry one vegan product because they called it Chev. And it's, of course, Chev is a French word. It's not controlled. You couldn't tell. There was nothing that said plant-based or vegan on it, unless you checked the actual ingredients. And I was just like, this is too misleading. This is just too misleading to sell. And they eventually changed that, but then they eventually went out of business.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
And a little bit, maybe not the right kind of karma on that one. Who knows?
Yeah.
It's just like I feel like in these situations, and for the ones who borrow proprietary words without permission, it's almost as if they are not. What's wrong? Can't you call the product your own name and give it its own nickname? Are you not confident in your work? Why do you need to borrow the other word that's already established that has sales? Why are you why isn't your product good enough to stand on its own and give it its own name? That's where, a rhetorical question, obviously.
Well, I will say that the best vegan alternative we ever had in the department, which doesn't exist anymore, was something called tofu misozuki, which was a fermented tofu that a local person was making because he had moved to the United States, couldn't get what he wanted in terms of like a really intense, pungent fermented tofu, and started making it himself as a hobby. And then started selling it at farmers markets, and then eventually started selling to us. And that was something. I mean, this is what gives me the feeling that there's possibility there that's really untapped in the U.S. market, because, as a fermented product, it stood up with cheese. It was pungent, and depth of flavor was there, and just intense, amazing thing. He had another job, and it became too big as a side project. So he decided to give it up because he was like, well, I don't really intend to be in the food business. We usually hear the other end of that story, but this is the like, nah, I'd rather go back to my day job.
Not easy.
But it was really, it was an incredible thing. And I think that especially as, we open ourselves up in the United States to the food of other cultures and the possibility there, rather than like the traditional cheese countries. I think there is a lot of possibility there. I mean, why, fermented food is good. Fermented food is interesting. What you ferment can be really great. Totally. There's room for these things.
Fermented foods. That's fair. Black garlic and miso paste, and there's so many examples, right? I guess you could let's look at salami. Just come on. Or cured meats. You get us going. Fermented foods are, I think, our listeners' favorite category, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, it's fitting into each philosophical view, trying to please your consumers and fill a need, run a business, all an incredible balancing act. So what would you say then what do we need to do more to get the word out about how beautiful, cow, sheep, goat, water buffalo milk is, or that they're actually eating a vegan plant-based diet? Would that be a way to kind of bridge maybe some people's comfort? Do you think any vegan would change their view if they were like, oh, I didn't realize that cows are actually, eating a plant-based diet? Like, do you think they're going to be like a little bell's going to go off in their head? Like, what would be your advice to growing our existing effort in the dairy world?
Well, first of all, I think that the whole issue of this whole show here is that we have, that selling this kind of cheese is already established, and these vegan alternatives are trying to like get some of that. So, I feel like we've already accomplished that. Like, I think trying to reconvert vegans isn't necessarily a best strategy.
Yeah.
And I think that people are, I think people want plant-based / vegan cheese alternatives for various reasons. I think that being real about environmental issues, and I don't think this show has enough time to go into that kind of stuff. I think that most of our customers at our store are buying, air quote, plant-based products in general throughout the store because they feel like it's better for the environment.
Right. That's a big point I meant to bring up earlier. And you could make arguments and on our good cheese makers who do more work.
Totally. And I think that other folks are doing it because of a commitment to like animal rights. Some are doing it because of allergies. There's different consumers within that one big category.
Sure.
So I think that, just addressing those interests and needs is important. I've had this one funny conversation, and I understand it was a philosophical thing, but this one customer was like, "Oh, I eat vegan to save the cows," and I was like, "Well, I'm like, I get you, but like, actually, what happens if dairy's closed is the cows get killed, right? Like, I mean, I understand you're talking about future cows." But but I don't think there'll ever be a future where cows are frolicking around, wild. They're kind of domesticated, right? So, yeah. I mean, I don't know we go too far down that line because it's a little silly, but it's like there is a little bit of a disconnect. And while I think you can make an argument, and it's up to people's own moral philosophies about what ethical eating is and whether that includes animals. The reality is that you're and what it'll do in the future. I think that the reality is, that people don't really understand that, like, that dairy went out of business and those cows got eaten,
Right.
So, but again, I don't want to make too big a point of that. It's more of a just.
You made a really important point to mention that folks that claim to be vegan, there could be different points of view as to why, right? And I wonder if the solution they're seeking by giving up cheese and going the other route is actually going to get them, to their goal, depending on the point of view. If it's climate change, there's a lot of argument against how that's not the way. If you want to save cows, you made an argument, right? There, like you said, it could be just simply like, hey, my gut can't handle. There's those. There's just folks who want to give their gut a rest, or it's a medical reason.
I would also say that in my experience, almost every vegan I've talked to, cheese is pretty much the last thing they gave up. They gave up meat well before that. They gave up other products, even like milk, and sour cream, all that kind of stuff. And cheese is often the last thing. And that speaks to, the importance of cheese in many people's diet and the impossibility of replicating it, and the flavor at this point.
Yeah, man, Gordon, I feel like we could talk all day though here, and this is really been great. But and maybe we can have a part 2 or have you back on to talk about a branched off topic. But I think we're just about out of time for today, and I hope you'll come back.
Well, invite me.
We'll do, man. We'll do. But Gordon, thank you for joining me today on Cutting the Curd to talk about this recent headline and other issues surrounding the vegan cheese alternative movement. I hope to see you soon at the American Cheese Society conference in Buffalo. Will you be there?
I will be there. I'll be there with 2 coworkers, and we're already excited. We're really going to be really quick this year. It's a long way for us, so we're there for 3 days, and that's it. But And I just want to say thank you. I mean, I love Cutting the Curd. Cutting the Curd's my favorite podcast, and it's a pleasure to be back on this show. And you all are doing such a great job talking about the issues. It's rare that outside of conferences and events that we get such a specific kind of discussion. And I feel like Cutting the Curd really helps with that because, most of the time we're talking with consumers in mind. And while certainly cheese eaters listen to the show, I think that it really serves a great purpose of those of us who work in cheese can really find a lot in these episodes. So thank you for doing it.
Man, thank you. I'm just a part of it, but thank you so much. It means a lot to hear that, especially with you, Gordon, and your background. Really, you're a wealth of knowledge, and we want to have you back soon. So thanks again.
All right,
cheese friends. You can follow Gordon at Gordon Zola Edgar on Instagram. And you can also follow us on Instagram at Cutting the Curd. You can follow Heritage Radio Network at Heritage_Radio and follow me at Sting Chef. Please listen and subscribe to Cutting the Curd via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you enjoy the show, please give us a 5-star review, which will really help us broaden our audience. Okay, thanks again, everyone. And if you love someone, send them cheese.
Cutting the Curd is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.